The sun was barely up when I found the gate padlocked shut, my crops fenced off like a zoo exhibit, and Karen, the HOA president, strutting around on my land like she owned it. You're probably wondering how I got here, and how that smug look on Karen's face would soon turn into horror when she realized I bought the property, and the only key to the gate she just chained shut. The first time I saw the fence, I thought maybe it was some kind of prank. It was early morning, the air still heavy with dew, when I rolled up in my battered old pickup and saw it standing there like some ugly scar across the land. 6 feet tall, chain link, topped with shiny, menacing coils of barbed wire that caught the morning sun like knives. It stretched around my entire crop field, a once open patch of carefully tended corn and tomatoes now boxed in like a maximum security prison. A bright orange sign flapped in the breeze. Community Improvement Project, no trespassing. I remember just standing there for a long moment, one hand gripping the truck door, the other gripping my coffee thermos so hard I thought it might shatter. My farm had been here for 3 generations, long before the developers paved their perfect cul-de-sacs and color-matching mailboxes into the surrounding hills. I was a fixture in this place, a stubborn old tree with roots deep in the soil, and for a while it seemed like maybe that would protect me. But Karen, oh no, Karen Mitchell, the newly crowned president of the Willowbrook HOA, had other ideas. I marched straight up to the fence line where a group of smug-looking men in reflective vests were still tightening bolts and setting concrete. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. One of them barely looked up from his clipboard, muttering something about HOA mandates and beautification standards. When I asked them on whose authority they were putting a fence across my crops, they just pointed vaguely toward the fancy clubhouse at the top of the hill. I wasted no time. Stormed straight to the HOA office where Karen sat behind her oversized desk, tapping away at her laptop like she was launching missiles instead of sending emails. "It is for the good of the community," she said sweetly when I confronted her, her voice the kind of sugary fake you only hear from people who are about to do something truly nasty. "Your farmland, while historic, no longer fits the visual harmony of Willowbrook. The board voted unanimously to install a visual barrier. A visual barrier. Like my family's blood, sweat, and calluses were some kind of disease she needed to quarantine," I argued. Of course I argued. I explained that I was grandfathered in under the original zoning laws, that my land was agricultural long before their HOA covenants were even dreamed up by some overpaid lawyer. Karen just smiled wider, the kind of smile you see on people who think they've already won. "You are free to appeal the decision," she chirped, sliding a thick packet of paperwork across the desk. "Meanwhile, the fines for non-compliance will accrue daily." Non-compliance, for existing, for growing food. I took the paperwork and left without a word, knowing damn well the appeal was a joke. These people did not play fair, they did not care about laws, history, or common sense. They cared about power, about property values, about keeping their streets looking like the brochure pictures they clutched to their chests at every board meeting. I tried being civil at first, wrote letters, called meetings, even hired a local lawyer who specialized in land disputes, hoping that maybe reason could still prevail. Karen responded by doubling the fines. Then she issued new notices citing me for unauthorized land use and failure to maintain acceptable landscaping standards. Even though my rows of corn were straighter and better cared for than half the lawns in the neighborhood, the letters came thick and fast, each one stamped with bold red deadlines and threats of legal action. At night, I saw the HOA security patrols, bright white SUVs cruising slowly past my locked gates, their headlights sweeping over the crops like searchlights. It was no secret they wanted me gone. I overheard them once at the gas station, Karen and her inner circle, laughing about how much my little farm was dragging down property values and how wonderful it would be once I was out of the picture. What they did not know, what they could not have imagined, was that I had been preparing for something like this for years, ever since the first hint of trouble when the Willowbrook development expanded to the edge of my fields. I had been quietly taking steps, updating deeds, researching easements, talking to old-timers at the county clerk's office who remembered the original land grants better than anyone else. I had spent hours sitting at the town library, poring over brittle yellowed maps and dusty court records while other folks were arguing over who left their trash cans out too long. Every fine they threw at me, every petty notice, I documented and filed away. Every lie they told, every overreach, I made a record. I was not just fighting for my land anymore. I was building a case, brick by brick, paper by paper, waiting for them to make the one mistake that would open the door wide enough for me to walk through. And if they thought a fence was going to scare me off, they had no idea what kind of storm they had just invited down on their heads. Still, the fence was a problem. Practical, immediate. My tractors could not get through. I had to climb over or crawl under if I wanted to reach the fields. It was humiliating, seeing my family's hard work turned into a locked exhibit for the HOA elite to gawk at from their golf carts. They even put up cameras at each corner, claiming it was for security, but really it was just to make sure the farmer stayed in his cage. One afternoon, I caught Karen giving a tour to a group of prospective homebuyers, pointing at my crops like they were part of some quaint historical attraction. "Of course we're working on modernizing the area," she said loudly, shooting me a triumphant glance as I stood there, sweat, soaked, and furious in the midday sun. "Eventually this will all be community green space, gardens, parks, maybe even a dog run." It was then that I knew, with absolute certainty, that they planned to take it all. Not just fence me in, not just fine me into submission, but force me off the land altogether. And the worst part, most of the neighborhood would probably cheer when it happened. They wanted their curated paradise, their neat little world without the inconvenience of farmers and dirt and life outside of HOA-approved guidelines. I spent long evenings sitting on the porch staring at the ugly fence cutting across the horizon, thinking about my next move. The way I saw it, I had two choices. I could roll over, sell out for whatever pittance they offered once the fines bankrupted me, and disappear like they wanted. Or I could finish what I had started. I chose the second. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. Not with fists or lawsuits or shouting matches at board meetings, but with patience, paperwork, and precision. The same way you kill a snake, not by wrestling it, but by cutting off its air supply and waiting for it to choke itself out. And the first step? Letting them think they were winning. Letting Karen walk around with her clipboard and her smug little smile, believing she had caged the big bad farmer. Because when the time came, when the gate key turned and the lock snapped shut behind her, I wanted her to remember that smile. I wanted her to know exactly how badly she had miscalculated. Every morning after that, I made a show of checking the fence, running my hands along the chain link, inspecting the locks, nodding approvingly like I was grateful for their handiwork. I went to every HOA meeting, sitting quietly in the back, taking notes while they patted themselves on the back for preserving community standards. I paid the fines, small ones anyway. Just enough to keep them thinking I was playing along. Meanwhile, in the background, I was setting the real pieces in motion, contacting surveyors, pulling title reports, finding every crack and loophole they had left in their rush to control the land around them. If Karen and her clipboard army thought they were dealing with a stubborn old farmer, they were about to find out that what they had really fenced in was a wolf. And wolves, once cornered, do not back down. They go for the throat. While Karen and her little kingdom were busy congratulating themselves for boxing me in, I was quietly expanding the battlefield. They were fighting in the open, throwing up fences and filing violations, all very public and obvious. I was fighting in the shadows, moving silently through the dusty corridors of old county records, whispering deals over diner counters with men whose hands were as calloused and stubborn as mine. See, most folks thought Willowbrook ended neatly where the HOA said it did, a clean boundary line drawn on their glossy brochures. But the real lines, the real history, were buried deep in land grants older than any of them could imagine, back when this place was just dirt roads and cattle tracks. The original developers had been smart but not infallible. They had carved out easements, maintenance rights, and odd little slivers of land ownership that were forgotten as the subdivisions grew and sprawled. Easements for utility lines, dirt access roads never properly deeded, patches of runoff drainage zones that had to be kept open under county law, tiny cracks in the wall the HOA thought was airtight, cracks I intended to drive a wedge into until the whole thing came crashing down. It started small. A handshake deal with Old Man Jenkins, who still technically owned the 10-foot strip of dirt road that provided back entrance to the HOA's so-called private clubhouse parking lot. Jenkins lived 2 towns over now, did not much care about Willowbrook, except to cash the occasional rent check from the HOA. When I showed him the original survey maps and explained what they were really using his land for, he was happy to sell it to me for a song, just to spite Karen and her gang. After that, I moved fast. Found a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who still owned mineral rights under a big chunk of the eastern properties. Mineral rights that, according to a dusty clause in the Willowbrook Charter, could be used to enforce underground easements. I bought those too. Piece by piece, deed by deed, I started stitching together a net that wrapped around the heart of Willowbrook. Most of the time, I used shell companies and silent partners to keep my name off the paperwork. No need to spook the HOA just yet. A cousin here, a friend from church there, a retired buddy who owed me a favor from our army days. They bought tiny, forgotten parcels that nobody else bothered to track anymore, and each one signed them right over to my holding trust when the time was right. The biggest coup came when I discovered that the land, the HOA office itself, sat on the smug little stucco building where Karen held her kangaroo courts, was actually built on a long-term lease, not an outright purchase. A lease that was expiring in just under a year. The original owner had passed away and the land had reverted to his heir, a second cousin who had no love for HOAs and an expensive divorce to pay for. When I offered him cash, no questions asked, he practically wept with relief. I closed the deal in under 2 weeks, paperwork filed so quietly it barely made a ripple. The Willowbrook HOA was now holding its meetings, writing its violation notices, sending its threats, on land it did not even own. Land that, in a few months, I could evict them from without so much as a warning. Every signature I collected was a nail in Karen's coffin. Every obscure clause I unearthed was another link in the chain that would wrap around the whole rotten structure and drag it into the dirt where it belonged. I worked nights and weekends filing paperwork, driving out to meet old farmers and widows and absentee landlords. The funny thing was, Karen and her minions helped me more than they hurt me. Every time they issued another fine, every time they sent another smug letter threatening to take me to court, it gave me cover. Made me look desperate, weak, like a man on the ropes instead of the one building the scaffold. They never saw it coming. They were too busy playing emperor of the cul-de-sac, too busy measuring lawn heights and counting Christmas lights, to notice that the ground under their manicured little paradise was slowly shifting. And just like water finds the lowest point, power finds the cracks. The more they pushed, the more neighbors they alienated. Folks who once nodded along to Karen's lectures about community standards started grumbling over backyard fences and late-night beers. I listened, I took notes, and when the time was right, I made quiet offers. A little easement here, a maintenance right there. It was not about the big pieces, it was the small ones that mattered. The way you take down a fortress is not by battering the front gate. It is by digging tunnels underneath until the walls fall in on themselves. By the time spring rolled around, I owned or controlled over 60% of the land Willowbrook depended on for basic access: roads, drainage, maintenance easements, even the tiny strip that connected their fancy community pool to the main water line. It had been hidden, scattered through dozens of names and trusts, but now it was all consolidated, wrapped up nice and tight under a holding company with a name nobody recognized and a lawyer too stubborn to back down. I even managed to pick up the old maintenance depot, a squat concrete building where the HOA stored their landscaping equipment. Turns out it had been foreclosed on years ago, and the bank was more than happy to unload it for pennies on the dollar. The day the sale closed, I drove by slow just to see if anyone noticed. Karen was standing in the parking lot, clipboard in hand, yelling at some poor landscaping crew about hedge trimming violations. She glanced up as my truck rumbled past, scowling at the dust I kicked up. I smiled and tipped my hat. She had no idea, not yet, but the clock was ticking. I had marked the date on my calendar in big red letters, Renewal Day. The day the HOA's lease on their precious clubhouse expired. The day I would walk in, deeds in hand, and pull the rug out from under them so hard they would not know which way was up. Until then, I kept quiet, paid my small fines, nodded politely at meetings, let them think they had won, After all, what was one farmer against the might of an entire neighborhood association? Just a man with dirt under his nails and a stubborn streak a mile wide. A man they had underestimated from day one, and that, more than anything else, was their fatal mistake. Because when you corner a man like me, when you fence him off and poke him with sticks, you had better be damn sure he does not know how to tear the whole house down around you. And me? I was just getting started. It all came to a head one sticky Saturday afternoon, when Karen decided to play what she clearly thought was her ultimate card. For months, she had been gloating around the neighborhood, acting like she already owned my land, treating the fence like a trophy she had personally earned through sheer force of entitlement. The fines kept stacking up, of course, each more ridiculous than the last. I got cited for inappropriate soil coloration one week, unauthorized agricultural activity the next. Karen's goons on the board rubber-stamped every violation she sent their way, each one a carefully calculated pressure point designed to drive me into submission, but I smiled through it all. Smiled when they took photos of me working the fields. Smiled when they tried to send city inspectors who quietly left shaking their heads once they saw the paperwork I kept tucked in my truck. Smiled when Karen announced at the last HOA meeting that they had secured a permanent management plan for the farmland, meaning they now officially controlled access to the fenced area. That day, she pulled out a shiny brass key during the meeting, holding it up like she had won a beauty pageant. The board will maintain sole access to the community fencing area from now on, she said, her voice syrupy and smug. For the safety and aesthetic standards of Willowbrook, all non-board members are prohibited from entering the fence perimeter without prior approval. The room had actually applauded. I sat in the back row, nodding politely, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I nearly drew blood. Because what Karen did not know, what nobody in that room knew, was that 2 days before her big announcement, I had closed the final deals that changed everything. I owned it now, all of it. The field, the access roads, the parking easements, even the little slice of land their stupid fence posts were anchored into. I had spent months threading the legal needle, untangling decades of bad paperwork and lazy assumptions, until there was no longer any question about it. Their entire so-called community improvement project was sitting squarely on my land, and the best part was they had no idea they were about to lose everything they thought they had secured. The real show started the following weekend when Karen decided to hold a photo op. She called it a community beautification celebration, sent flyers to every mailbox, rented a bouncy house for the kids, and hired a local newspaper photographer to document her triumph over the unsightly farm. I heard about it through the same grapevine that had fed me gossip for years, only this time I encouraged the whispers. Let her build it up big, let her invite the whole neighborhood. More witnesses made it better. That morning the whole of Willowbrook seemed to buzz with excitement. Golf carts rolled through the streets adorned with balloons. Kids chased each other through perfectly manicured lawns. Karen herself showed up in a crisp white pantsuit and a massive sun hat, looking every bit the queen surveying her conquered territory. She carried the brass key on a glittering gold chain around her neck, pausing to show it off to anyone who asked. Around 11 a.m., the crowd started gathering at the gate. Karen led the procession, a gaggle of HOA board members and loyal followers trailing behind her like ducklings. She gave a short speech about community pride, about perseverance, about how they had reclaimed the farmland for the greater good. Cameras flashed, phones recorded. It was exactly the moment she had been dreaming of. Then she stepped forward, brandished the key dramatically, and slid it into the padlock on the gate. It didn't turn. Karen frowned, jiggled the key harder. Still nothing. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She tried again, face flushing red as she twisted and yanked. Nothing. Finally, she turned to one of the maintenance guys, hissing something under her breath. He fumbled with a giant ring of keys, tried 2 more. The gate refused to budge. That is when I stepped out of the crowd. I was wearing my old battered boots and my work jeans, dusty and stained, the same way they always were when I was doing real work, instead of posing for pictures. In my hand was a folded stack of papers, thick enough to thud against my palm as I crossed the street toward the gate. "Problem, Karen?" I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. She whirled around, fake smile frozen on her face. "There seems to be some kind of issue with the lock." she said through gritted teeth. Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. That gate is HOA property, she snapped. You are trespassing. I laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was the kind of full-throated belly laugh that comes from months of waiting for exactly this moment. Trespassing? I said, shaking my head. Karen, sweetheart, this land is mine. Always has been. The only thing that changed recently is that now I own the easements too, and the clubhouse lot. And, oh yeah, the land this fence is standing on. I handed the papers to the maintenance guy, who took them automatically, blinking like he had just been hit over the head. These are certified deeds, county records, filed and recorded. If you do not believe me, feel free to check with the registrar's office. I made sure they have copies on hand. Silence fell over the crowd. The maintenance guy shuffled backward. The board members huddled together like sheep caught in a thunderstorm. Karen stood her ground, but I could see her knees shaking. You are lying, she said, voice high and brittle. This is a stunt. Nope, I said cheerfully, stepping forward to unlock the gate. It swung open with a satisfying creak. This, I said, waving them through, is private property. You are all currently trespassing. And if you do not leave in the next 5 minutes, I will have the sheriff's department come and explain it to you. A few of the smarter ones started backing away immediately. Mrs. Carter from Maple Lane grabbed her kids and bolted. The photographer from the local paper lowered his camera, looking uncertain. Karen stood frozen, her knuckles white around the useless brass key. You cannot do this, she whispered. I already did, I said, flashing her a grin. And just so we are clear, any further use of HOA funds to maintain or enter this property will constitute embezzlement and criminal trespass. I have already filed preliminary notices with the county. So if you feel like testing me, by all means, be my guest. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Karen dropped the key. It clattered against the asphalt, tiny and meaningless now, a scrap of brass that symbolized everything she had lost. She turned and marched back up the street, her little army trailing after her in shamed silence. I watched them go, leaning casually against the open gate, enjoying every delicious second. When they were gone, I turned back to the crowd that had stayed. The regular folks. The ones who had just wanted a nice place to live without getting caught in someone else's ego trip. I nodded politely. Feel free to enjoy the view, I said. It is still a working farm after all. Just mind the tomatoes. Some of them laughed nervously. A few even clapped. And just like that, the power shifted. The HOA board was not untouchable anymore. They were just another group of bullies who had picked a fight they could not win. That evening, I changed all the locks. Installed new fencing along the access roads I now owned. Posted bright, shiny signs every 20 feet. Private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I even had a little fun with it. Putting up one special sign right across from the clubhouse entrance. Smile. You are trespassing on farmer property. Karen tried to fight it, of course, filed complaints, threatened lawsuits, but it was too late. The law was on my side. The deeds were airtight. Every petty maneuver they attempted just dug them deeper into the hole they had gleefully started months before. And me? I kept farming, kept smiling, kept polishing the big brass key that actually mattered, the one that opened every gate, every door, every path they had once tried to block. They thought they had fenced me in, but I had fenced them out, and now the land was mine again, free and clear, just like it always should have been. The weeks after the great gate debacle moved faster than I could have dreamed, like a slow-burning fire finally catching a dry forest and racing toward the horizon. The shockwave from Karen's humiliation at the fence spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. People who had once clutched their HOA rulebooks like sacred texts now crossed the street to avoid being seen talking to her. The board meetings grew emptier. The whisper networks grew louder. It did not take long for the rest of the consequences to start falling like dominoes. First came the realization that the HOA could not legally maintain half their so-called community amenities without crossing my land. The clubhouse parking lot, the pool filtration building, even the little pocket park with its overpriced playground equipment, all accessed by roads and easements I now owned. And I was not feeling particularly charitable. I sent certified letters to the HOA board outlining new usage agreements. they could continue accessing the facilities, of course, but at a price. A very generous price. My lawyer, a pit bull of a woman named Claire who had defended farmers against land grabs her entire career, made sure the contracts were airtight. Maintenance vehicles, toll fee, landscaping crews, permit application, community events, rental agreement. Every move they made cost them another check written out to my holding company. Within 2 months, the HOA Reserve Fund, once bragged about in quarterly newsletters as the gold standard of fiscal responsibility, was drained dry just paying to mow the grass and empty the clubhouse dumpsters. Meanwhile, the residents, most of whom had been duped by Karen's pretty words and promises of property value utopia, started asking uncomfortable questions. Why were their dues skyrocketing while services declined? Why was the clubhouse locked up on weekends? Why was the community pool closed for maintenance during the hottest summer in a decade? It all came to a head at the next general meeting, when a mob of furious homeowners demanded Karen explain herself. I sat in the back, arms crossed, savoring every second as she stammered and sweated under the fluorescent lights, her sun hat long abandoned in favor of a somber navy suit that did nothing to hide the panic in her eyes. It got worse when Claire, standing up from the back of the room, politely introduced herself and informed the entire crowd that Willowbrook HOA had been operating on private property without legal right for over a year. That every dollar they had spent maintaining facilities was now subject to reimbursement claims. That pending litigation from our side would make sure of it. Karen tried to deflect, tried to point the finger at the rest of the board, but they were not fools. Rats know when the ship is sinking. They turned on her faster than you could blink. Within a week, Karen resigned as president, citing health reasons, and retreated behind the iron gates of her McMansion at the top of Maple Lane. But even that sanctuary would not last. With the HOA crippled, unable to fund even basic community maintenance, property values began to dip. Word got out beyond Willowbrook about the lawsuit, about the chaos, about the poor management. New buyers fled, sellers panicked. Homeowners Association Management International, the agency that had overseen Willowbrook's finances, dropped them like a hot brick after reviewing the pending liabilities. Without centralized management, Willowbrook fractured into bitter little fiefdoms of angry residents, each blaming the next for the mess. Karen's own property, the one she had preened over for years like a trophy wife on a parade float, was among the first to hit the market. Listed well below value, no takers. I heard from a neighbor that she even tried offering it to some of the developers she had once wooed with promises of expansion and beautification. They laughed her out of the building. By the end of the summer, facing foreclosure and rapidly mounting legal bills, Karen was forced into a fire sale. Her grand McMansion, with its marble countertops and imported hardwood floors, sold for less than she had paid a decade earlier, and she slunk out of Willowbrook in the middle of the night, her moving van creaking under the weight of shattered pride and broken dreams. As for me, I was not content to just sit back and bask in the victory. I had plans. I did not just want to survive. I wanted to make something better, something lasting. It started with the old fields, the ones they had once fenced off like a zoo exhibit. I tore down the chain-link fence with my own 2 hands, panel by panel, piling the twisted metal in great heaps to be hauled away as scrap. In its place, I planted rows of bright wildflowers along the border, native species that painted the landscape in explosions of gold and purple and crimson. I tilled the soil and reopened the old produce stands, just like my grandfather had once run, where local families could buy fresh tomatoes, corn, squash, and peppers picked that morning. The empty clubhouse, once a monument to HOA vanity, I bought at auction when the bankrupt association had no choice but to sell it. I turned it into a community market. Farmers from surrounding counties brought their goods. Artisans set up booths. Food trucks rolled in on Saturdays. The very heart of Willowbrook, the place they had tried to fence off and destroy, now pulsed with life and color and commerce. And at the front gate, where the old entrance sign had once proudly declared Willowbrook a master-planned community, I installed a new monument. It stood 10 feet tall, welded from iron and bronze, visible from half a mile down the county road. A rooster, proud and defiant, wings half spread, clutching a large brass key in its beak. At the base of the statue, a simple plaque, burnished to a brilliant shine, read, "To Karen, who lost it all over a fence. It became something of a local landmark. People would stop to take pictures, laughing at the absurdity, admiring the craftsmanship. Kids from the high school art program painted murals along the nearby walls, scenes of farmland and open skies, free of fences and HOA notices. Tourists from neighboring towns came for the farmers' market and left with stories about the rooster and the man who had beaten the system. But for me, it was never about the statue or the market or even the victory. It was about what the land had always meant to me: freedom, hard work, community built not on rules written by petty tyrants, but on handshakes, on trust, on the simple decency of neighbors looking out for one another. Every morning I would walk the property at sunrise, boots crunching over gravel paths, the fields stretching out golden and full of promise. I would pass the statue and tip my hat to that giant iron rooster, a silent salute to a battle fought and won. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the breeze was right and the early light caught the brass key just so, I could almost hear Karen's voice carried faintly on the wind, sputtering with outrage, still trying to find a way to unlock a door that had been closed to her forever. But by then, the key was out of her hands, out of everyone's hands but mine. And I planned to keep it that way, a reminder that sometimes the fences we build to trap others are the ones that end up trapping us instead. I leaned against the porch rail, a cup of strong coffee in my hand, and watched the sun rise over the fields, feeling the rich, steady pulse of the earth under my boots. My land, my rules. No fences needed, only wide open space, and a future as bright and wild as the rooster crowing atop its iron pedestal.